We've all heard stories about people pretending to be someone they're not on dates. Maybe they exaggerate their job title, maybe they hide their flaws, maybe they act more confident than they feel. But this story is about a billionaire who did the exact opposite. She hid her wealth, on purpose. Not out of insecurity, but because she wanted to know who actually cared about her, not her bank account. And the only person who passed her quiet little test was a tired, overworked single dad who had no idea his life was about to change forever. She was known to the world as Elena Hartfield, a self-made billionaire with companies stretching across continents. To the public, she was polished, powerful, sharp as glass. But behind the magazine covers and boardroom negotiations, she was just a woman in her early 30s who went home to an empty penthouse in silence that echoed through the marble floors. It had been years since she'd gone on a date without wondering whether the other person was really seeing her, or just the number of zeros behind her name. So Elena created a simple rule for herself. No one she dated would know who she really was at first. Instead, she'd show up in simple clothes, faded jeans, plain sneakers, a worn sweater that made her look like just another exhausted office worker. She'd meet men in ordinary cafes rather than exclusive restaurants. If they complained, demanded, or mocked what they saw, she walked away. Most didn't pass. Some men turned cold the moment they realized she wasn't flashing wealth. Others made little comments about aiming higher or finding someone more ambitious. A few were polite, but distant, clearly disappointed she wasn't the glamorous billionaire they'd seen online. Elena learned to hide the sting. She would smile, finish a coffee, and quietly exit their lives before they ever discovered the truth. Then one rainy evening, everything changed. She had arranged to meet a man named Daniel. He was a single dad, raising his 8-year-old daughter on his own. He worked long hours at a repair shop and spent the rest of his time helping with homework, cooking simple meals, and making sure his little girl never felt the absence that hung like a ghost in their home. He hadn't planned on dating again. He only agreed because a coworker insisted he deserved happiness, too. Elena arrived early and sat by the window of the small cafe, hair tied back, no makeup, clothes simple and plain. Outside, the rain blurred the world into gentle streaks of silver. She expected the usual polite disappointment when he walked in. Instead, Daniel came rushing through the door, wet from the rain, hair messy, clearly having run straight from work. The first thing he did was apologize to the barista for dripping on the floor. The second thing he did was look around nervously, hoping he hadn't been stood up. When their eyes met, he smiled. Not the practiced smile of someone trying to impress. A warm, real smile. "You must be Elena," he said, voice gentle despite sounding a little tired. "Yes. And you must be Daniel." He didn't scan her clothes. He didn't glance at her shoes, or judge the plain sweater she wore. He simply sat down, ordered a cheap cup of tea, and asked about her day. And for the first time in a long while, Elena felt seen. Their conversation flowed easily. He talked about his daughter, about the chaos of school mornings, about learning to braid hair because no one else could. He didn't complain. He didn't seek pity. He spoke with love, with humor, with a softness that surprised Elena. When she mentioned she worked in business, he didn't pry. He simply nodded and said, "That must be stressful sometimes. I hope you still make time for yourself." Most men she met were busy selling themselves. Daniel seemed more interested in listening. At the end of the night, he didn't assume anything. He simply said, "I had a great time. If you ever want to do this again, I'd like that. But no pressure." She agreed before her mind could catch up. Their dates continued. Walks in the park. Cheap coffee. Picnics with homemade sandwiches. Sometimes his daughter would call during dinner, and he would step aside, smiling softly as he talked to her. He never hid that part of his life. He never pretended to be more put together than he was. He was simply real. One evening, while they were sitting on a park bench watching the city lights, Elena finally asked him the question that had been lingering in her heart. Would it bother you if the person you were dating made more money than you? He laughed lightly. "Elena, I fix old machines for a living. Pretty much anyone makes more money than me." She smiled, but he went on, voice sincere. "But honestly, money doesn't impress me. Character does. Kindness does. How someone treats people who can't do anything for them, that tells me who they really are." Her chest tightened. No one had ever said something like that to her without knowing who she truly was. But secrets can only stay hidden for so long. Eventually, her world collided with his. One afternoon, a man from the repair shop recognized Elena from a financial magazine. The next day, Her name was whispered around the shop. Photos were searched. Screenshots were shared. And suddenly, Daniel arrived at their usual cafe looking shaken. He sat down slowly. "So," he said quietly, "is there something you want to tell me?" Her heart pounded. She had expected anger, betrayal, maybe even accusations. Instead, Daniel just looked hurt. Not because of the money. Because she hadn't trusted him. "I didn't want to lie," she said softly. "I just needed to know someone could care about me without knowing who I am on paper." He sat there for a long moment, absorbing her words. "Do you have any idea," he said finally, voice barely above a whisper, "how many people walk past me every day and assume I'm nobody? Just because I'm a single dad. Just because I don't wear a suit. Just because my hands are rough and tired." He didn't accuse. He didn't shout. He simply understood. "I get why you did it," he said at last. "But trust has to go both ways." She swallowed. "You're right. And I'm sorry." The next few weeks were uncertain. They took space. They talked slowly, carefully. She invited him, nervously, to her real world. High towers, private meetings, polished tables. He didn't shrink. But he didn't act dazzled either. He greeted everyone kindly, from the security guard to the executives. He didn't act like he'd won a prize. He acted like he was simply standing beside someone he cared about. Her board members looked puzzled. Some whispered, "A billionaire dating a single dad from a repair shop?" But Elena didn't care anymore. Because Daniel had passed the test, not the wealth one. The humanity one. He never asked for gifts. Never hinted for money. If anything, he became more protective of his independence. Still waking early, still packing school lunches, still living humbly. But now, sometimes, when long days were over, Elena would sit at the tiny kitchen table with him and his daughter, eating spaghetti from mismatched bowls, laughing at silly jokes, feeling more at home than she ever had in her penthouse. And one night, as his daughter fell asleep on the couch, Elena watched Daniel tuck a blanket around her shoulders. His movements were careful, gentle, practiced from years of loving without fanfare. When he turned back, she realized. This was the richest man she had ever met. Not in money. In heart. Their story didn't turn into a fairy tale overnight. They had difficult conversations. They set boundaries. They built trust slowly. But they built it honestly this time. And word about the billionaire and the single dad eventually got out, as stories like these always do. Some people judged. Some mocked. Some romanticized it beyond recognition. But none of that mattered to the two people who had sat together in a small cafe that rainy evening, when neither wealth nor status had anything to do with what they saw in each other. Because in the end, the billionaire who pretended to be poor finally found someone who would have chosen her even if she truly had been. And the single dad who had always felt invisible discovered that sometimes, the right person doesn't just see you, they choose you, exactly as you are. Not for what you own. Not for what you can offer. But for your heart. And that, as it turned out, was the greatest fortune either of them would ever know.